Andy Staples, theathletic.com, joins us with Paul, Catalina, Craig, and David Smoak. Andy, thank you for your time. Your thoughts about what is the next part of what we saw that began last Thursday with UCLA and USC. Do you feel like there's going to be kind of a pause for a while, or do you think something else happens in the next, let's say, 2 or 3 months?
Well, I think it depends on Notre Dame. I think if Notre Dame decides that this is the time that they have to join a conference in football, then they're going to pick one and join it, and then all the other dominoes will fall. But really, it seems like the Big Ten is waiting to hear from them to see if they want to do anything else. And I don't know that the SEC does anything else, if the Big Ten doesn't do anything else. So it's one of those things where Notre Dame can say, they don't have to say no. They're allowed to say not now. Nobody else really has that freedom, but they could say not now. And then everybody kind of moves on with their business. And I think that's important because if they say yes, then we know what the Big Ten's going to do. They're going to go ahead and move on with whatever their master plan would be if they get Notre Dame. And we find out whether that includes Oregon and Washington. Because what happens with the Pac-12 and Big 12, I think, depends largely on whether Oregon and Washington remain members of the Pac-12.
Andy, what do you think say Notre Dame makes everybody wait? Do you think then we're in a holding pattern, or do you think that the Big 12 stays aggressive and the ACC tries to figure out a way to increase their value while rating the Pac-12?
Well, the ACC is going to try to figure out a way to increase their value. I don't know that rating the Pac-12 makes any sense at all for them. I mean, I realize the Big Ten now stretches from coast to coast. The Big 12 basically stretches from coast to coast. But having a bunch of schools on the Eastern Seaboard and a bunch on the West Coast does not make much sense. Also, casting your lot with the ACC unless they can get a new TV deal is not really worth it. And the problem for the ACC is if they can get a new TV deal, that probably breaks their grant of rights. You're going to lose Clemson to the SEC. North Carolina is going to pick the Big Ten of the SEC. Virginia is going to pick the Big Ten of the SEC. Maybe Florida State goes to the SEC. So they've got to be really careful with what they do. If I were the Big 12 right now, here's what I'd do. I would go to Oregon and Washington, and I would say, you can join us, and we won't make you sign anything. You can leave anytime you want. Because that's the thing the Pac-12 won't do. They're going to say, you need to commit to us for a period of years and say that we're going to be together. If the Big 12 could say, we don't care if you commit to us, we'll take you.
It's very interesting.
They could probably get everything they want out of that.
I haven't heard anyone ever say that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
And so, and you don't lose if you're the Big 12. You gain them for a year or 3 or 4 or maybe longer. You continue to stabilize yourself, and maybe others want to come with them.
Yeah, because that eliminates the threat, and that turns. Let's be honest. If the Big 12 has a TV deal that has that bunch in there, that let's say Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Utah, Arizona State, well, they're going to have. It's a really good league, and I bet it makes more per school than the ACC.
Andy Staples, athletic.com with us, Sikkim 365 Radio, 365 Sports.
Andy, I know it's been a few days now, and the writing for the moves that we're seeing, whether it be Oklahoma or Texas or the LA schools, has been rumored about. The writing's been on the wall, so to speak, for a little while. But to actually see it happen was still pretty nuts. What was your initial reaction when you saw that the news drop about USC and UCLA?
Wow, they really did it. Somebody actually took one of my stupid ideas. I wrote a story about 2 days after Oklahoma and Texas said they were going to the SEC, saying the Big Ten needs to raid the Pac-12. That's the next logical move. Now, I said they would go for half the league because they could create kind of a mini division over there, and you could play all the Olympic sports where you could have that just be a 16 mini conference for Olympic sports. They clearly saw it more as just take the best pieces and then go. Now, I would argue that Oregon and Washington are good enough pieces to Big Ten, but I think they're looking at it where if they can get Notre Dame, they may want to go south and they want to try and see if they can get some of those ACC schools because then they could really be a truly nationwide conference.
Andy, that brings me to the article. You and Richard Deitch, I saw that earlier, and you had also done an article about the grant of rights and how hard it is to get out of it, how it's written, how the ACC and the Big 12 is almost not quite verbatim, but very much close to copy and paste. You hear that the ACC will try to get some in the ACC. If they're going to leave, they have to get through it. What you learned, is that not impossible, but will be incredibly difficult?
It's not impossible, and we'll see how difficult it is. Because if everybody wants to change, then it's not difficult at all. It's if you've got more than half of the people that don't want it to change, then you've got some problems. But anything that causes a fundamental change in the identity of the league is going to make some school feel like they've got an out. And it's interesting because I keep thinking back to Texas and Oklahoma and how quiet they were when they started. Because normally you hear stuff behind the scenes where people say, oh, don't worry, we'll be out of here by 2023 or whatever. You didn't hear that at all. Even off the record, those people were like, no, we may have to stay till 2025. It's okay. We'll deal with it. But I think they thought this was going to happen. And so let's back up to that scenario I just laid out. Let's say the Big 12 gets aggressive and those Pac-12 schools say yes. If you're the Big 12, you're going to go to Fox and ESPN and say, hey, their contract was going to end. They're not governed by any TV contract at all right now. How about we just renegotiate a new deal? And it all starts in 2024. And guess what? If that happens, the grant of rights falls apart because it's tied to the TV contract, and Texas and Oklahoma are free to go to the SEC.
That would seem to be the only way the Big 12 would have to let them out so they could immediately replace the revenue.
There'd be no letting them out because they would be willingly walking away from the deal.
And you're saying that you think that they've kind of had this plan in mind, potentially?
I don't know if they had it in mind. I think it was more they were expecting further chaos.
I agree with you, man. I was saying this just last week. I feel like there's been another plan in place, and I think that you just nailed that plan. Something with Oklahoma and Texas and the whole, like, everybody's saying there's no way they stay until 20. I think there's always been some sort of idea of how they could get around that, and I think you just nailed it.
Well, and there's another way, too, and it just involves money. Like, you say for this season and next, and then as you go into 2024, you say, listen, we have 1 year left on this deal. Here's how much you guys would make in that 1 year. What if we gave you an X dollar amount that is X dollars more than that amount? Would that be reasonable? Would you like to make more money than less? And you know what they're going to say in that case? Yes, we would.
Yeah.
No, they probably would, although they were angry back in the fall. They probably would have said no to that as well. Man, your idea about Washington and Oregon on our chat room and our YouTube channel is like everybody's like, want you to run for president.
But nobody wants to do that because everybody wants to act like these are 100-year marriages.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
What has the past 100 years of college football taught us? They're not. So just admit that, deal with reality on reality's terms. And, oh, by the way, a commissioner who has no experience in this world, who's worked in pro sports and in entertainment, might be a little more open to something like that because they don't look at conference affiliation as something sacred.
Andy, I want to go back to the ACC real quick because they signed a grant of rights kind of, I mean, I know some of their lawsuits will say under duress because of, teams leaving. They lost Rutgers and Maryland and they lost Maryland and not Rutgers, but they were trying to lock everything in. And it was clearly now it's very short-sighted to sign, a 20-year grant of rights.
If they say someone was holding a gun to their head, they're lying.
Yeah.
They were holding it themselves. They were the ones who wanted this. That's the one thing. I don't have as much sympathy for these ACC schools because this is exactly what they wanted. And now it's biting them in the butt.
Yeah. But if you're Clemson and you've gone toe-to-toe with Alabama recently and you've won national titles and you can see the income chasm growing even larger, if you're Florida State and your big rival in-states always had more money than you, but you were able for a long time to counteract that, but now, again, it's growing further and you're kind of stuck in the mud, like how long do you want to sit around and wait for this before you cause chaos in your own league yourself?
It's already happening because there's a group of those schools, and the way the people at those schools will tell it is they're tired of carrying all the weight. They would like to be either rewarded for carrying that weight or they'd like to go somewhere else. And so what they're pushing for is an unequal revenue distribution, which I still don't think will make them happy. I think it'll remember after the Texas OU news broke, there was a meeting of Big 12 ADs and presidents, and they came out and kind of meekly said, well, we could give them more money. And I was like, no, there's no amount of money you could give them that's a better deal than the SEC. And I think that's probably what, if you're Clemson, if you're North Carolina, if you're Florida State, if you're Miami, and you might have other options, you're looking at it going, I don't know, there's an amount of money that these people can give us.
Andy Staples, theathletic.com college football senior writer as well. When we see what's happening and everyone then wants something today, tomorrow, next week, or whatever, next month, and obviously Notre Dame might be whatever that timeline will be, when do you see the eventual mega conference so-called national championship separately from everybody else?
Well, there's no playoff in place for 2026. So something's got to be established. So I'm curious to see what the landscape looks like within the next year, because they're going to start nailing that down in the next year. They're actually going to start talking about it in the next few months. But guys, this can go fast. I don't know how. I don't know where those are at, because if I were to say something definitive, I'd be lying. But this really could go fast. We could be talking about months rather than years here.
Where do you see the Big 12 right now when it comes to any kind of strength compared to the top two of SEC and Big 10?
I mean, nowhere.
Yeah.
It's not even close. But
no, not compared to them. Not in that same atmosphere.
Yeah.
Not at all. As far as where they are compared to the others besides the Big 10 and SEC.
That is the operative question. So if they could get, even if they didn't get Oregon and Washington, let's say the Oregon and Washington went to the Big 10, but they got Colorado, Utah, and Arizona schools. I think that's the number 3 conference right there by revenue, and probably by prestige and power. Because if that happens, there's a legit chance that the SEC gets something from the ACC. But even if the SEC doesn't get anything else from the ACC, and if the ACC is stuck in this deal, I think the Big 12 can leapfrog it. Well, I say leapfrog. The Big 12 is already ahead of it. The deal they had currently is ahead of the ACC deal, and my guess is they'd stay ahead.
Would you put Stanford in with the Big 12, or would they be Big 10 or independent?
I don't know that anybody's going to want them. Now, I'm sure the Big 12 would want them because they're Stanford, and who wouldn't want to have that academic powerhouse in their league? But what fans do they bring? What eyeballs do they bring?
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, just saying about the Big 12 and being a third tier, what is the third tier in this case? Is it still on the outside looking in versus the other two, or is it just being the kings of the rest, the best of the rest, so to speak?
See, I think that when this all settles out and we kind of figure out where everybody is, the biggest mistake the Power 2 could make is to kick everybody else out of the playoff or create a postseason that shuts down access to the rest. Let everybody have access. The NCAA tournament, do you think the schools in the Northeast Conference really think they're going to compete for the national title? Of course not. But they start every season with a real chance.
Right.
So make access. And the way they were going to do it with the 6th highest ranked conference champs, there you go. That means 4 conference at least 4 teams that aren't in the SEC or the Big 10 could get in the playoffs in that scenario. And I bet it would be more than that. And I think that keeps everybody happy.
Because that's about the percentage of what they're getting now. Because out of the 4, there's 2 that are SEC, and that right now, I mean, 2 out of 4, and that doesn't include if the Big 10 gets somebody in,
right. And I think in a lot of years it'd be 5 or 6 from outside those 2 leagues if you had a 12-team playoff. So I don't think there's any reason to do anything radically different than what they were planning on doing. I think that would be that would be something that might satisfy somebody. Because here's the thing: if you tell Texas Tech, Baylor, Kansas State, West Virginia, Arizona State, Cal, all those people, you don't matter. You have no shot at the national title. Let's be realistic. They don't have a shot at the national title now.
Sure.
But it feels like they do. So let it continue to feel like that. It doesn't hurt you guys. It doesn't hurt you in the Big 12 or the Big 10 or the SEC at all to do that. And it makes everybody more interested in the sport. And they're going to watch your games casually. Whereas I feel like if you're a K-State fan and the Big 12 just gets totally X'd out of everything, and the Big 10 and the SEC, the only leagues where anybody can really compete for the title, I don't want to watch their games. I'm just mad at them.
Right. Yep.
But if I feel like my team, if it has a great season, has a chance to get in the playoff and go try to slay Goliath, then I'm not as mad. And then I do kind of want to watch Notre Dame, Ohio State, or whatever, USC, Michigan, or whatever it is.
I would think in 2014, TCU and Baylor fans probably, not that they weren't paying attention to everybody else, but probably that year when it was so close for them to get in the playoff, probably paid more attention to everybody else around them than ever before.
Oh, much more of that Ohio State, Wisconsin butt kicking than they ever intended to because it mattered.
Yeah. Well, I was at Baylor K-State that night, and I know most of the eyes were on their phones or on the screens in the press box going, how many points have they scored? What?
Well, we're done. But yeah, but you're right though. And that's the question I've had, Andy, is just, people talk about just, all those teams will just go to the wayside and they'll just be cast away. And it's like, but that's a large chunk of people. And that's a lot of interest. And you're right. Like, I mean, why would I care about the Big Ten title game if I know that it doesn't matter who wins or loses? TCU has no chance whatsoever of getting in. That's you nailed it. Absolutely.
Exactly. So I think that's the biggest mistake they can make. And I don't necessarily think they're going to make that mistake. I think they understand that it being, college football as a national sport is a better sport, and college football with a little bit of Cinderella in it is better for the sport. Like, I don't know how good of a chance, let's say Arizona State suddenly becomes really good, and they're a Big 12 school at that point. I don't know how good of a chance a Big 12 champ Arizona State would have against Big 10 champ Ohio State when the revenue gap is that big and has been that big for 10 years. But I sure still want to see the game.
It's what
I want to see them try.
It makes the men's basketball tournament what it is, and I know that's a different type animal, but that always is what's made it great. It's not who wins it; it's also who also has that first weekend shocker. That first day or two shocker.
I think of the Big 12 title game last year going in, you're looking at Oklahoma State. If they win, they're probably in the playoff. Yeah. If things go awry and Baylor wins, well, there's still an outside chance Baylor could get in. But with with that whole, it's just these two and nobody.
The winner definitely got in.
Yeah. Exactly.
Andy, what do you expect to, and thank you for your time today. What do you expect to hear from Brett Yormark next week in Arlington? Anything?
I don't know, because it kind of depends on what everybody else does between now and then. He may be talking about, we're welcoming our new members, Utah and Colorado, or he may be saying, we'll be expanding again, and we bid farewell to Baylor and TCU and Oklahoma State and Texas Tech, and I don't know. I have no idea. Here's what I will say: I find this very interesting, the dynamic, because it has become very much Big 12 and Pac-12 pitted against one another in this fight for survival. And you've got this group of Big 12 ADs and presidents and office staff who've been through every conceivable realignment scenario there is. Nobody in the Pac-12 has been through any of this. They have no idea how any of this works. So if it's street smart and having been through it before and realizing you got to make a big play and a big splash and be very aggressive, well, I'm going to take the Big 12 in that scenario. The only caveat being is if Oregon and Washington say, you know what, we're happy here, we want to be in with these schools that we've been in with for so long, then the power is just gone. There's no power dynamic anymore. They're going to steal some schools from the Big 12 and might be some of the ones right down the road from you.
Andy, thanks for your time. Hope to see you. You'll be in Arlington next week?
I will not, but
Okay.
I will be there in spirit and watching on the computer and tweeting all the way through it.
All right, buddy. Thanks for your time. Andy Staples, theathletic.com with us. Sikkim